All right. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the final talk of the 2024-2025 OCHS virtual winter speaker series. Though it doesn't feel very much like winter today. But my name is Ben Falter. I'm the Director of Education at the Ontario County Historical Society in Canandaigua, New York. Before I turn things over to our wonderful presenter, just a couple quick things I want to mention. So this entire speaker series, this is the last talk, but it has been on topics related to photography to coincide with our current exhibit, From Studio Portraits to Snapshots, which is all about photography in Ontario County, and it is only up for about 6 more weeks. The exhibit closes at the end of April to make way for our next annual exhibit. So please do, if you're in the Canandaigua area, come on down to check it out before it leaves. And thank you, of course, for tuning into this event. If you have any questions or comments during the talk, please type them into the live chat here on YouTube, and I will pass them on to our speaker during the Q&A. You can also access video playback of the talk after it concludes from the same link that you are using to tune in right now. Without further ado, allow me to introduce our wonderful speaker for tonight, Jolana Hollister. She is originally from the Czech Republic, but has made Rochester her second home. She is a Rochester City School District and St. John Fisher University graduate and celebrated 10 years in business last year. Her mission is to provide experiences through high-end photography that elicit a sense of belonging, empowerment, and connection to ourselves, others, and nature. Jolana is the co-founder and vice president of the Breast Cancer Confidence Project. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, and I am going to disappear and turn things over to her.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm really excited to give this talk. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Let me just move this over here and tell this to go. Oh, hold on. Share. There we go. All right. All right. I'm hoping that's up. Everybody can see it. So, as been introduced, I am a photographer in the Rochester area. I've been doing this for 10 years, and I've had a shift over that 10 years to really focusing on boudoir photography. And so this was actually a lot of fun doing the research. I knew a little bit of the history, but I dived a whole lot deeper to put this presentation together. And so I thought an appropriate name for how it goes through history is Seduction to Empowerment, the History of Boudoir Photography. So a good start is, what is boudoir? I'm going to leave this a little bit up in the air without quite answering it, just because it really changes. But the best way to define it for the entirety of this presentation is really that boudoir is a reflection of societal attitudes towards sensuality, femininity, and empowerment. And a reason to really study boudoir and understand it is because it really shows the role photography has in reshaping how we view beauty and self-expression over time. So this is a little bit of the timeline that I'm going to go over. I did start a little bit before photography just because I think there's a lot of roots of where boudoir came from in the 17 and 1800s that kind of influence how it goes from there. So we're going to go from then all the way up till sort to the present. All right, so its origins. So boudoir photography, we kind of find its origins in the Rococo period, and if I said that wrong, I'm so sorry. But it is kind of the fine art boudoir. It originated in 18th century France. Boudoir itself means, the name itself means women's private room or bedroom, and that's kind of what you see in these images right here. It was kind of almost like a voyeuristic view into what men believed women did in their bedrooms and what it looked like. So it originated in 18th century France, and it often depicted aristocratic women in intimate and sensual poses. Artists such as Francois Boucher and Jean Honoré Fragonard, painted, idealized, romanticized images of women in their private chambers. These photos were by Jean specifically, or photos, paintings. And so you can really see the style is kind of, you're peeking in, they're not posed, they're very much kind of like what is naturally, or I'm going to say quote unquote naturally happening in terms of what men believed was happening in the women's chambers. And something that I mentioned through this entire presentation is really the intended audience. The reason I do this is it changes drastically from now till, or from then to what boudoir photography is now. So at this point in the 1800s, the intended audience were really wealthy aristocrats and noblemen for the paintings. So here's another example. This one was called Nude on a Sofa, appropriately speaking. And this was a famous commissioned boudoir portrait for King Louis XV. It was done in 1752, and this one was done by Francois Boucher. Now, this image was of Madame de Pompadour. She was one of the king's mistresses. She was one of many of the mistresses that he had painted in this style. She was also the youngest. This painting was done when she was just 14 years old. She did become one of the king's favorites until the point of her trying to unwisely unseat her rival, and that got her a swift kick out of the kingdom, pretty much. She was married off and left, but not before having an illegitimate daughter with the king, whose name was Agatha. So from there, we kind of go into the 19th century, when like the origins of photography. The first thing that really revolutionized portraiture was the daguerreotype, which was invented in 1839. This really revolutionized portraiture. It made intimate imagery a more widely available thing for people. It was invented by Jacques Monde de Goure. I'm butchering these names, I apologize. But it was the first commercially successful photographic process in the history of photography. It was named after the inventor, and each daguerreotype is a unique image on a silvered copper plate. So as you can imagine, these were not cheap to do. It's not like now where we have these prints that are just easily, you just need some photo paper, we can all have access to it. These were very heavy, inflexible prints. They usually came in a kind of as you can see in this photo, it usually had like a frame around it. And these were kind of thick things that you could set on top of things. They were not light, they weren't flexible. And because of this, they were really still meant for upper class individuals who discreetly commissioned these works of art of boudoir. Even though it was very much private in nature at this time, these images challenged traditional depictions of femininity and intimacy, and it kind of gave a different view that we didn't have before. All right, so we then go to the rise of photography. This is where really boudoir took off, and what a little bit more of what we would refer to as now. So the first period I'm really going to focus on is the Hollywood glam, 1920s, 1930s. Think The Great Gatsby, Flappers, just a lot of there's a lot more freedom in terms of expression during this time. It was also the 1920s. I think that kind of describes it all on its own. So the Art Deco movement and the rise of the flapper era really brought new levels of female empowerment during this time, and that is reflected in the photography. A big name during this time was Alfred Cheney Johnston. A little bit about him: he was born in New York City into an affluent banking family, which then subsequently moved to Mount Vernon, New York. In approximately 1917, Johnston was hired by the famed New York City live theater showman and producer Florence Ziegfeld as a contracted photographer. And he's really known for his portraits of the Ziegfeld Follies, which were the showgirls, as well as actors and actresses from the world stage and film. He was one of the few contracted photographers for Vanity Fair. So you can kind of see how the switch is going from something that was private and for, let's just say, like noblemen to being more commercial. Anything in magazines, the point of it is to sell the magazine, right? So that's kind of where the shift is going with boudoir on its own. A little bit about the Ziegfeld Folly. So this image is of one of them. Now you can kind of see a huge change in what we saw before. It is still indoors, like you saw, but these are a whole lot more posed. They are using props. They're very much focused on the women, like sensuality. And if we go a little bit further, I'm going to skip this image for 1 second, come back to it. They are very much focused on the woman in the nude, but if you notice something, most of these body types are pretty similar. They are different, but we don't have a lot of variety in terms of age or race or anything like that. So we're gonna go back to here. These were the Ziegfeld Follies. A little bit about them, just because they come up a couple of times in this presentation. This was a series of lavish Broadway musicals that ran from 1907 to 1931. The Follies were a huge success and became a defining feature of the Broadway season. The Follies were created by theatrical impresario Florenz Ziegfeld and his wife, Anna Held, his first wife. Just want to make sure I made that clarification. And the Follies featured songs, skits, dances, and one-act plays. They were famous for their chorus girls, who were often known as the Ziegfeld girls. So this is an image of them. They really transformed the Broadway musical at that time. And early boudoir photography really became synonymous with Hollywood portraiture and that emerging pinup culture that we're gonna lead into next. But this is what it was, and it's very much focused on famous people, on that commercial side of photography in that world stage at that time. So then we have the golden age of pinup, 1940s to 1950s, which really, the popularity soared during World War II, and that is for a couple of reasons. The actresses and models posing, a lot of times would be posing for morale-boosting imagery for World War II, and the US government really took advantage of this. So the US government began using propaganda to encourage young men to fight for their country with the knowledge that sex sells. So again, photography, especially boudoir photography, in terms of being in that commercial world. They began using pinup girls on their recruiting posters with slogans such as "She's worth fighting for" or "Come home to your girl a hero." This made the pinup girl one of the most recognizable forms of boudoir and really paved the way for modern boudoir by normalizing the female form in advertising. So this was really a time where you would see pinup photography on cigarettes, tail fins of the fighter jets, things like that. Let's see. So there are a couple of names that were big during this time period that really shaped this world a little bit more. The first is Bunny Yeager, and then we have Alberto Vargas, who was actually an illustrator, but he did life photo-like images. And I totally skipped over a section, so before I skip that, this style you're going to see really differs from the classic boudoir, as pinup was used more for the commercial purposes that I already mentioned and for marketing. And it was really in a lot of famous magazines. So again, there's that commercial side. It was in Esquire and Life, and it played a major role in the widespread use of these images. All right, so we're gonna first talk about Bunny Yeager. This is an image she took of Betty Page. Her real name was Diane Arbus, and she actually started her career as a model aka the different name. And her comfort on both sides of the lens is one of the skills she learned to bring out the level of comfort and naturalness which few other glamour photographers could really master. And that's what her photos are very much defined by. Because she understood both sides of the camera and because she was a female, up till this point, most of the photographers and artists that were drawing these paintings of women or taking photos of women were men. She was one of the first women to be, and one of the only women to be featured in the Playboy magazine and do contracted work for them. And her photos really helped women feel more comfortable on the other side because she had been on both sides. So here's a little bit more of her work. That first photo we just saw were her work. This is a little bit more of it. She was best remembered for her iconic collaborations with Betty Page. And you have her here, and this was also a photo of Betty Page. As you can see, the photos are a little bit more from that female perspective. They're not the voyeuristic style. The person is very clearly knows the camera is there, but it's kind of the woman giving her chance to portray herself in the images versus what the male would like to see. She flipped the switch, creating sultry self-portraits and pinup shots from a woman's point of view, working in an age where men really captured and controlled most of the distributed images of women. And she was also credited for helping popularize the bikini in America. So there goes that commercial side again. A lot of her images were women in bikinis outside, sunning themselves on the rock like this image shows. But you can really kind of see the starting to be shift with these images that we're seeing. And they're still, I just like to point out, because that's a big difference now, they're still very much focused on a certain age woman, on a certain beauty standard. So we then have Alberto Vargas. I'm actually going to play a video for you guys for this one. This video does an amazing job of capturing everything that I wanted to say and has the images, so this is going to be the better way. I'm going to show you guys the video, and then I'm going to kind of dive into a few of the things that you guys saw.
Few artists have had the power to weave their indelible mark on the fabric of a nation's identity. A premier American illustrator of the 20th century, his rendering of the female form inspired our troops abroad while challenging society's ideals in the land he came to love. With a style that's best described as photographic, Alberto Vargas created spectacularly lifelike images that captured, glamorized, and solidified the attributes of some of the most beautiful women ever. Untouched by time, the artwork created by Vargas would come to define decades. Peruvian-born artist got his start in the Roaring Twenties at the legendary Broadway showgirl theater Ziegfeld Follies. Alberto's artwork not only graced the posters used to promote this popular institution, but also found their way onto magazine covers for Harper's Bazaar, Vogue, and Motion Picture Magazine, to name a few. When the Great Depression hit, it forced the flourishing artist to head west and leave his young wife to seek employment in the motion cinema mecca of Los Angeles. Vargas is often referred to as a celebrity portraitist, commissioned by some of the most notable leading ladies during this period. Saw blame and adversity. Alberto's style changed immensely when he joined Esquire magazine and developed the incredibly successful Varga Girl. The popular pinup girls brought a great sense of pride to the immigrant artists, as his American sweethearts adorned many a plane that fought in World War II. However, in the fall of 1943, these same beauties brought upon an unsuccessful lawsuit against Esquire, in which the U.S. Post Office cited Vargas for obscenity, alleging he'd gone too far in exploiting the female form. An inspiration to the armed forces, the works also illustrated the controversial power of a beautiful woman in present day society. ascension to social icon status was accompanied by its tribulations. The trademark to his name, Varga, had been owned by Esquire magazine. An editor of the magazine had dropped the S to make it more appealing to the masses. Realizing this far too late, Alberto lost his name and most of his money in a lengthy court battle, but he did not lose hope. After the golden age of Hollywood, that spurred Vargas to complete one of the most famous works of the 1950s, a portrait of an up-and-coming beauty who would soon be known as Marilyn Monroe. It was around this time that he was introduced to a highly controversial magazine publisher who, like Alberto, pushed the limits of what was acceptable in American society. His name was Hugh Hefner. In 1957, a few of Vargas's works were published in Playboy magazine. By September of 1960, Vargas was a regular contributor and circulation boom. His works appeared in every single issue of the controversial Gentleman's Magazine, 1960 through 1978, where he worked exclusively for the remainder of his career.
So that's a little bit on him. I thought that kind of summed everything up, but a few things I wanted to point out from that video. You see the Ziegfeld Follies are brought back in. So that really, they really had a huge impact on boudoir, whether it was illustration or photography. And you can see how shifting into even the Playboy magazine, this is still very much focused on being something for men. It was either commercial or men. Playboy magazine was very much focused on men and their desires, and you can see in that video the images reflect that. So after all of that, we go into the 1960s and 70s, which did see a big shift. We have the sexual revolution. So think 70s. I think that all is kind of self-explanatory when you look at that time period. We had the second wave of feminism, body autonomy, sexual liberation, and breaking societal norms was the theme for women during that time, especially kind of that sexual liberation and being able to be more exposed and not kind of pushed down by what society believed we should be doing. A lot of this was sparked by Betty Friedan. So Betty Friedan published her book, The Feminine Mystique, and that really helped ignite the whole movement. It was published 10 years after French philosopher and author Simone de Beauvoir published a book entitled The Second Sex, which provided extensive definitions of womanhood and outlined how women have historically been treated and have been second to man. It became a huge phenomena in the USA, and Betty Freeman sold 3 million copies in the first 3 years of publishing her book. Middle-class women across the country began to organize and advocate for women's social and political equality. It was the same year that Feminine Mystique was published. President John F. Kennedy signed in the Equal Pay Act of 1963. Which I think most of us know what that was, but that was the legislation that stipulated that women could no longer be paid less for doing the same jobs that men were doing at the same comparable work. So this really kind of sets the stage of where women are in the feminist movement, and it really sets the stage for the next set of type of boudoir photography that we see. Boudoir evolved from something that was created for men's pleasure to a means of self-expression and women empowerment. And the audience during this time period was very much women commissioning boudoir portraits for themselves. Of course, at this point, it was still pretty expensive to do, so this wasn't everyday women. This would be high-class women, actors, actresses, models that could really afford to do this. We have one big name during this area, the high fashion photographer that really redefined artistic boundaries for sensual imagery, and that was Helmut Newton. Helmut Newton was a German-Australian photographer who used boudoir and outdoor settings to create provocative fashion photography that challenged conventions and redefined the way women were portrayed in advertising. So again, there is that commercial side of things. Sex sells. That's always been a thing throughout history. inspired by film noir, expressionist cinema, S&M, and surrealism. You can kind of see that this photo on the right is from him. He preferred to work outside of the studio, and he also kind of adapted what we saw in the beginning with that kind of voyeuristic approach of just looking in on a scene that's happening. He was, and this kind of shows the two different sides during any part of history when it comes to any movements, right? So a lot of feminists criticize Newton for overly suggestive and unnecessarily risky images, while others praised him for images that were seductive and full of power and freedom for those women. I will let you guys make up that decision yourselves on which side you believe he fell on. But these are some of the examples of his work during this time period. That first photo is him actually inspecting the legs of a model on a shoot. And you can kind of see that like sexual liberation in these photos. We have the girl on the right who is smoking, and this is very much her in her own life. Doing what she wants to do without we're not trying to make her into something very pretty that you see a lot of the pinup were girls smiling, and it was very much like trying to welcome you in and welcome the viewer. These are a little bit more, this is my life, this is what I want to do. So a shift in the perspective in that. Now we come to the one that I think sticks out the most. So we have feminism and its impact on boudoir. We have the 1980s. We have glamour photography. I'm sure we all remember photos from this time period, but we've had a very steady type of images leading up to this, right? They kind of started a little bit more clothed, they started a little voyeuristic, then becoming more commercial, focusing very much on what is seen as like society's beauty standards. All the images until now very much reinforced beauty's or society's standards of beauty versus trying to go against what and break those norms. 1980s, you can see how that's kind of become a shift, which is awesome to see. We have glamour photography. Now, think mall studio glamour portraits. That's really what gave a huge rise to boudoir during this time. It also made it more accessible to everyday women and men. This is the first time that boudoir was something that your average middle-class person could go and purchase. It wasn't something that was only meant for models or actresses or anything like that. That accessibility meant that it could be more for the person themselves. So until this point, all of the images, even though they were of of the client or let's say the model, the overall viewer was supposed to be the men, the magazine's commercial. It wasn't the person who had the portrait done. Now there's that shift of, instead of it being for somebody else, these photos are directly for the person themselves. So one of the biggest ones during these mall studio glamour portraits was a company called Glamour Shots. They were, in particular, became iconic for their dramatic, over-the-top style of photography with lots of makeup, props, and outfits. I think those photos are self-explanatory for that. And this time was really known for soft focus boudoir. So soft focus boudoir, if you look at those two images on the right specifically, they show it the best. You see how it's a little softer around the face. The face is a little brighter than the rest of the image, and it's not as sharp as the rest of the image. That's really what defines that soft focus. So it's not about the sharpness and contrast. It's about kind of being softer on that face. It draws your eyes directly in. The brightest part of an image is where our eyes tend to go first. So it does draw you in a little bit more, but it is a very unique style. Another thing to really notice about these glamour portraits, outside of everything else that we already mentioned, is they're very posed. They're not outdoors. They're very much in a studio. I would say almost plain background. You can see in all of them, it's one plain background or something that's like a hanging sheet. They're highly edited, and they're usually torso up. So you could recognize a glamour shot anytime. Any photo you look at, you'd be like, yep, that was taken in the 80s. It has a very clear style from everything else. And just kind of a interesting fact, so boudoir portraits around this time cost between $50 and $500 to have them done. That in today's world would be between $400 and $5,000, which is actually pretty on par with what boudoir costs at this moment, depending on what you go with. And it was also available to men. So this is the first time you see men in any type of boudoir. Until now, it was obviously kind of sex sells geared towards men. This was a time period that men could have their own boudoir portraits. So you can kind of see that's becoming more of a thing. We then move into the digital era and self-love movement. So it's the 90s to the 2000s. You can see a clear shift in the type of what the photography looked like. So if we go from this to this, there's obviously a big shift. This is when we really, we enter the digital era. So that already gives us a whole different ability when it comes to photography. There's greater experimentation with lighting and style because we're not set to 30 frames. We can take as many frames as we want, delete, and start all over, and it's not costing us anything extra. So this time really brought about a lot of great experimentation. And it's during a time that bridal boudoir became really popular and rose. This was a popular wedding gift for women to give their partners. That also kind of shows you the time that it was expected for someone to get boudoir. So because it was meant for as a wedding gift, it kind of insinuated that most people who got boudoir portraits were young women about to enter that like married stage in their life. So here, the audience is a whole lot more the bride-to-be, women seeking a confidence, self-confidence boost, a big shift from being for the men. It is technically a little bit still for the men. It's as a gift for them, but it's a whole lot less than it was in the past. And you can kind of see the shift in the style of the photos too. So if you look at the photos on the left or on the right, they're very bright. They're a little bit more on the cutesy side, but they're definitely showing off who the woman is. They're becoming a little bit more diverse. It's starting to be seen as something for everybody, not just for the typical beauty standard, but not quite. It's getting there. We're getting there in history. And the photos are a little bit more posed to look natural. So they are still very posed, but they're posed to look more natural versus them looking directly into the camera behind a screen like you had in the 1980s. Then we enter the digital era of self-love and the self-love movement. This is really where I come in, and any photos you actually see from this point forward in the presentation are photos that I took, because this is kind of where I live, a little bit towards the end. I'll explain that a little bit better later. But this 2010s to the present is huge about feminist boudoir and body positivity. It's really the third and fourth wave of feminism that embraces intersectionality and self-love. Boudoir photography now celebrates the diverse body types, diverse genders, identities, ages. It really covers everything. It's not meant for just one type of person. And it's the emergence of many styles. So like that last section showed, because of digital photography, we could do more. Once it became a little bit more mainstream, you can see the rise of many different types of boudoir. Some of the styles you'll see bright versus dark. So my images are very dark compared to what we saw on the slide before. They are all different body types. You don't see just like that one standard definition of what beauty is. We have kind of that cute and sexy versus more of the sultry and suggestive. A lot of the boudoir now is a little bit more suggestive, but it is still meant for the woman, not for anybody else's eyes, unless they want to share it. There's other types of boudoir. There's erotic boudoir, not something I do, but there are photographers that do erotic boudoir. Those are a little bit more in the act photos. Some would say more pornographic, but it is still very different from that because porn is meant for the viewer, not for the person who is in the images. We have couples boudoir has become a big thing. Maternity boudoir, men. There's boudoir and doudoir. So doudoir is men doing the same poses women do, kind of as a joke. They're usually meant to be funny and as a funny gift. But there's also regular male boudoir, which is men need self-confidence boost just as much as women do, and that's what they are for the men. And then there's also boudoir as therapy. I will get to that in a second because that's mostly where I fall into. Another big thing during this time is Photoshop. So until about the early, I would say 2000s, Photoshop has been heavily, heavily used, especially in magazines. Any images you see of women are highly Photoshopped. And it really reinforces what society thinks beauty is and makes it impossible a lot of times for women to see their own beauty because they have stretch marks that are edited out in every other photo. So anything they see in mainstream media shows that women don't have stretch marks. It shows that, women don't have scars. They are all one certain type. They have tiny little waists and bigger hips, but a lot of that was Photoshop. With this new movement, especially once you hit like the 2010s, you see a lot of boudoir photographers do not Photoshop. We try to show what the natural beauty is. So these are some of the images, and you can see with the black and white one, it's kind of highlighting her stretch marks, but also showing the beauty of them. And really, this time period right now is big on just acceptance of our imperfections, accepting that imperfections make us beautiful. It's not the other way around, as it's been often believed. So here's a couple more photos. As you can see, they're all very different. every woman looks very different. It's for all ages. We have the couples boudoir in the top corner. And really the audience for all of this is the individual seeking that self-expression. Maternity boudoir, that's a good example of that. Maternity boudoir can be clothed, unclothed. It's really focused on showing the beauty during pregnancy. And something that's also become very popular nowadays is showing kind of before and afters in the boudoir world. So a lot of women, when they see boudoir portraits, they're like, those look beautiful, but I could never look like that. And because the focus of boudoir is like the main clients for boudoir photographers are everyday women, you see a lot of images, something like this. So this is one of my clients who let me show her photos, and it just kind of shows what she looks like every day. This is what I wear every day. This is what I look like every day. And then what you look like when you are posed. And my studio specifically, we offer hair and makeup. So it kind of shows that full transformation to show people that it doesn't matter you don't have to be a model to do these photos. It's really meant for everyday women. So boudoir is therapy and healing. This is honestly why I love boudoir and why I got into the field of doing boudoir photography. I went to school for psychology, so I have my bachelor's degree in psychology, and for a little bit struggled with the fact that I do photography, which I absolutely love, but it didn't really tie in that therapy side of things, and this does. It's definitely, I would say, more of in the last several years where boudoir has been emerging as something that can be used for therapy and healing. So it's a tool used for healing, self-acceptance, and empowerment. It helps individuals struggling with mental health, body image issues, and self-esteem see themselves in a different light. Sex therapists often recommend boudoir as an add-on to therapy for domestic abuse survivors, individuals struggling with body image issues. It's really kind of the fourth wave feminism comes in here, where fourth wave feminism is really focused on breaking the cycle of abuse and being able to speak out about it and claim our bodies back as belonging to ourselves. So there's a lot of therapeutic benefits to boudoir photography. It's a tool for healing. It helps women see themselves in a different light than we see ourselves if we look in the mirror. A great example of this, a local example, is Dr. Jessica German Folken. So Germano Folken, she is a sex therapist. It was local. She actually recently moved to South Carolina, but she is a huge name in the sexual therapy realm and sex therapy realm. And she has a 10-week intensive course program that helps empower women to work on discovering and enhancing their personal and sexual self and just being strong, happy, and empowered. And one of the suggestions she has in her course is actually to go and get a boudoir shoot to kind of help tie everything that she's taught together. I was lucky enough to be able to write one of the chapters in her course, which was super cool, on just self-acceptance and self-confidence. And so then there's also, I mentioned it a little bit before, but some of the women that I have seen a lot in my studio are women who've suffered through domestic abuse, domestic violence, sexual abuse, bullying. Those are all types of women that I see in the studio. A lot of moms who haven't felt beautiful since they had children because it's changed, their bodies changed, and they were having a hard time connecting with the new body that they have. Um, that's something I see very, very frequently in the studio. And it's amazing to see that transformation of reclaiming themselves. So, especially when it comes to the domestic and sexual violence survivors, these photos help them reclaim themselves. Before it, a lot of times when they look in the mirror, all they see is the damage that their partner did. They see the scars, they see everything that reminds them of that terrible time in their life and what they went through that they never should have gone through. Doing a boudoir shoot helps them reframe their brain and see their bodies as their own and like reclaim it, know it's their story to tell, and they can direct where that story goes. And so seeing that is really, really, really cool. Being able to do that with the women in my studio. Empowerment photography, there's a lot of empowerment photography projects like the Art of Survival, which highlights survivor stories from domestic and sexual violence. And it really just highlights their stories and shows their images to help others heal as well. So the biggest one for me is boudoir and breast cancer. I'm the co-founder in the Breast Cancer Confidence Project, and this has become a project that is very near and dear to my heart. It's a huge passion project, and just seeing these women see themselves and see their scars in a whole new light has been just awe-inspiring. So when it comes to breast cancer, many breast cancer survivors use boudoir as a way to reclaim their bodies post-surgery. You can kind of see that theme in that therapy realm. A lot of times scars and mastectomies place us in a place where we no longer fit that societal beauty standard that's expected of us. A little side note, a lot of what's seen as the societal like expectation of beauty, especially in the 90s and the early 2000s was, and the 80s was the Barbie doll. We all played, a lot of us played with Barbie dolls when we were little, and that's kind of seen as like, that is what is expected that we look like. Fun fact about the Barbie doll, it was actually based off of a sex doll created in France that somehow made its way over here and became a doll. Very, very not accurate when it comes to body proportions. If you actually made a Barbie doll into a person, she would fall over because the breasts are so big that the proportions do not work. The hip wouldn't be able to, the body wouldn't be able to hold the torso at all, actually. So that's kind of what we have been taught as women since the 80s, 90s to 2000s of what beauty should look like. And for breast cancer survivors, especially with so much femininity being tied to their breasts, it's difficult to get over that and still see that they are a beautiful and sexy person and that they, haven't lost that. So what we focus on with the Breast Cancer Confidence Project and other, there's the Grace Project as well around the US that focus on helping breast cancer survivors break through that and see and reclaim their confidence and their self-esteem and their body image. So 3 out of 4 breast cancer survivors struggle with body image after treatment because of everything that I just mentioned. Also, all the photos that are out there of like mastectomies and treatments are very clinical, and they do not inspire any hope. When you look at those photos, it doesn't make you think like, wow, that person's really beautiful, because it's taken in harsh light, it's taken in a hospital setting, and it's really taken to highlight the scars, not highlight the person as a whole. So that's where my nonprofit comes in, is really helping break that. And just all in all, when it comes to boudoir and the healing side of it. If you look at research, there are so many studies that show body positive photography and how it affects our self-perceptions. Articles in Psychology Today that show the link between photography and self-esteem. We can see that in just everyday life. When we look at a lot of these children that are growing up right now with so much social media and Snapchat and these filters that make it look like your skin is porcelain and that nobody has anything other than perfect skin because we don't go through puberty or something. So if you look at all of that, it really shows how much photography has an effect on our self-esteem outside of boudoir in general, which is why I think boudoir is so important, especially in these times, to help reframe that for women. So these are some of the photos of women in all stages of breast cancer that we've worked with around the country, actually. It just shows that whether you choose to remove both breasts, keep both breasts, do reconstruction, only remove one, it doesn't take away your beauty. If anything, those scars show that you're a warrior and you fought and you won and you should be proud of them. This is actually a series of photos with my co-founder, Michaela Reyes. She is the one who went through breast cancer. We documented her whole journey, and the photos you see here are ones that have won several awards and were featured in an exhibition in Barcelona, Spain in December of this past year for the storytelling aspect of going through breast cancer. So I show these because for me, I feel like boudoir has definitely taken a big shift, obviously, since we started, but even in the last 10 to 20 years from just being something that's fun to do and to like see ourselves in a different light. And it's really taken a big shift into being a form of therapy. All right, so now that I've gotten all that out and we've talked about all of the photos through history, when it comes to boudoir photography, I will define what I take boudoir photography to mean here in the present and how it kind of differs from the past. So in the past, it was very much works that were commissioned commissioned by the elite. They were meant more for boudoir, for the actors and models and meant for commercial use. They were extremely expensive to have done, which is why only the elite could really afford it. They were created for the viewer, not for the client. They really limited to a specific beauty standard. You don't really see much deviation from that. And they were a little bit more of an objectification of the individual. For me, it's kind of the opposite on all of these. So boudoir is something that's private in nature. It's an investment in oneself. So it's still not cheap, but it is definitely a whole lot more affordable than it used to be. It is created for the client, not the viewer. And really, it's breaking beauty standards, and it's inclusive of all body types, all ages. I think the oldest client I've had in the studio is 70. We've done anything from 21 to 70-year-old. So it's really for everybody. And it's a celebration of confidence and self-love. It is not about objectification. Something that I hear frequently nowadays is people asking if boudoir is porn. Because not everybody is used to women, which kind of brings in that third and fourth wave of feminism, being so open with photos that are a little bit more nude, especially photos of everyday women. So that was common before, 60s, 70s, 80s, but those were illustrations and those were actors and actresses and models, but it wasn't seen on that end of like the middle class woman. It is not porn. The big thing to know, to kind of keep in mind, is porn is very much intended for the viewer, not for the person having the photos taken. And porn is about objectifying different parts of the body versus boudoir is very much about including the whole body, seeing the person as a person. There might be up close of different body parts, but it's not to objectify them. It's to accept them and see what they are in that light versus like you looking at yourself in the mirror. So I thought it'd be kind of cool to just take a photo from kind of each genre, and I just realized I switched those two photos in the front, so I apologize for that. So this one should be first, and this one should be second. But kind of seeing how it progressed. It went from being a little bit more of that voyeuristic style, peeking into the bedroom, aristocratic woman, to very much that Hollywood glam, a little bit softer, not really on that sultry, sexy side, but like on that softer, feminine person should be. And then we kind of transition into the period of Betty Page and Yeager was her name. Those images you can tell are a little bit more for the viewer. They're breaking those standards a little more than they were. And as we shift, the 80s clearly stands out as the most different, I would say, out of all of them. But the shift has really been to being about being for men to being for women and focusing on the beauty in all body types. And that's it. That's all I got for you guys. So thank you for listening to my TED Talk.
All right. Well, thank you so much. That was great. Anybody who's watching, please go ahead and send any questions you have in the chat. They are about 30 or so seconds behind us, so they'll catch up in a second here. But I will start out the questions. Just with of the sort of previous eras or genres of boudoir and its predecessors, do you have like a favorite like historical period or genre of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a sucker for the Hollywood glam kind of portrait.
Yeah.
I love that, but I love seeing the modern iterations of it. So I love the Hollywood glam because of just how women were styled. It was still to me, it was very feminine, which I liked about that. But I love the iterations now where it's women of all body types that are being presented in that Hollywood glam. And I think that's what makes it so beautiful is seeing it doesn't have to be that one specific beauty standard. So a lot of photographers now will offer Hollywood glam photos, but they're of all different body types, and it just kind of like shows that beauty a little bit more.
Yeah, great. Question from the chat. How would you say public perception of boudoir has changed, over time, particularly recently, and has social media impacted the perception of boudoir in any particular way?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I would say the public perception, I always kind of see it as, how we always look at the previous generation or like the future. So if we're the kids, our parents are like, oh, like we weren't like that, we did this, and we're kind of seen as like the rule breakers. I kind of see boudoir as being in that same position. So every time while it was out, it was kind of seen as a little bit scandalous, a little bit out there because it kept pushing the boundaries of what we were used to seeing. So I kind of feel like it's always been a little bit behind of like catching up to what is societally acceptable in society. In the last few years, I think social media has definitely had a huge impact on it. So one, I would say when I started doing boudoir in 2020, it was still a lot of people who were, I would say, over like 40 who haven't been as exposed to it as much were the ones that would ask me if it's the same as porn. Like, oh, are you shooting porn? And I'd be like, no, absolutely not. But it took a little bit to understand how to best explain it of what it really is. Now, I would say in the last year or two, I mean, it's become, I think, very societally acceptable to have a boudoir shoot done. With social media, a lot of women sign off to have their photos shared. So I mean, obviously I'm in the world, so I see it more, but I see a lot of women posting their boudoir photos on social media, and they're not posting it to get likes or to be like, hey, look at how sexy I look. A lot of them are posting because they're like, holy cow, like I feel beautiful in this photo, and I've never felt that way before. And I've really noticed, like, since I started in 2020 to now, it's become a whole lot more acceptable. There was a huge boom in 2020 as well. So when COVID hit, a lot of people had this extra money from the government not being able to spend money on what they wanted to. I know it was a time of less money, but in a way, with the economy, I found that my business boomed during 2020. And a whole lot more women were coming to get boudoir sessions done because they actually had the money for once. So there was a huge boom in that. And then there was also a big boom in people becoming boudoir photographers because they weren't able to go shoot weddings. They weren't able to shoot events and do all these big things. It had to become a smaller scale. So boudoir became extremely popular amongst photographers.
Huh. That's interesting. It's sort of to bounce off that, you started doing boudoir photography, you said, in 2020. And I know you touched on this a little bit already, but could you talk a little bit more about like what influenced you to really like start diving into this medium, start taking photographies in this medium?
Yeah, so for me, it's interesting because if anyone who knew me since I was little, they would not use the words like daring or like kind of pushing those societal norms as something that would describe me. I was the person who was very conservative, kind of the way I grew up. Sex wasn't something you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
You kept yourself to yourself. You wouldn't take photos like that. And then I kind of had I don't know, I hit my 30s and I broke out of that.
Sure.
And I entered this whole like being comfortable in my own skin.
Mm.
And that really helped me realize how much of us don't have that. Um, and so what fully pushed me into doing it is I actually had my own boudoir session with, I would say, kind of my idols in the industry in Ohio. And the feeling I got from it, realizing how empowered I felt, how I was like on cloud nine for like 10 months straight. And this was right after a depression and going through a lot of family matters. It was the first time I felt like myself in a very,
Mm.
very long time. And once I felt that, I wanted to offer other women the same feeling. It happened to be that one of my absolutely first clients was Michaela, who I started the Breast Cancer Confidence Project with.
Yeah.
And just seeing how it impacted her ability to heal through all of the stages, which she actually had to go through every stage of treatment because she was diagnosed in 2020, right when COVID hit. Like literally 2 days after the
Mm.
shutdown was her first surgery. They couldn't take her
Yeah.
straight into doing the double mastectomy she needed because they were worried they didn't have enough ventilators.
Yeah.
So she went through every single step versus just going right to what she needed.
Mm.
And seeing how much it impacted her is really what made me want to do it more. I felt like I was using my psychology degree finally a little bit more and being able
Sure.
to just help everyday women feel seen and feel beautiful. And yeah, that's kind of how I
No,
got there.
that's great. Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great journey. Always good to find a use for your degree too. I understand that feeling well. Um, well, great. I don't think there's any other questions in the chat, but if I do get any in the aftermath of this, I'll pass them on to you in via email or what have you. But I want
Awesome.
to thank you so much for speaking, and I want to thank everybody who tuned in for tuning in. It's been great to do another one of these virtual speaker series, and if you want to keep up with Jolana's business. You can find her website for her photography business in the description of this video. You can also find the information about the Ontario County Historical Society in the description of this video. So
Perfect.
you can keep up with what everybody's doing. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you another time. Have a good one.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.